Okay, so this video is going to explain the basics of audio editing in Ableton, bringing audio files into the program, using them, editing them, arranging them, and then in the end, we'll talk about how you save projects that have audio files and how you make sure that all those audio files are part of the project that you are working on. So, as I explained before, we have two types of tracks in this program, audio tracks and MIDI tracks. If I want to create a new audio track, the key command is Command T, or I can go up to the Create tab here and choose Insert Audio Track. Now, in Ableton, you cannot insert audio into a MIDI track unless you put it in specific places. But the general concept is if I want to add audio tracks to Ableton, Command T is where I'm going to be able to put those audio files. So if I'm adding a clip from a recording of some kind, I will use an audio track instead of a MIDI track. A MIDI track is an instrument. It's completely different in its concept. And right now we're just talking about audio. So we are going to hit create and use audio. Now I'm going to also talk a little bit about how to use audio in a MIDI track if you are interested in trying to turn a sound you have into an instrument. So I have created 4 audio tracks here. The first thing I want to do is add audio to this project. So I could use, first of all, my library over here where it says places, right? I have my samples library, all these folders that I've added to this. But if you don't have these added, you can simply go to the Finder. In this case, I've gone to my samples folder. I can go to, here's some examples of some recordings I made. I can take this recording and just drag and drop it right onto the window. So if I drag and drop it into any of these tracks, it's going to add it to the track and create what's called a clip. So we now have an audio clip on the first track on measure 1 at the beginning, and I can do all kinds of things with this and use it in the project. So first of all, if I want to repeat this sound, for example, there are several ways of repeating a sound if you want to duplicate it. The easiest way is Command D. If I hit Command D, it will just duplicate that clip over and over and over. I can also Option drag. So if I hold down Option key and drag over, I can make another clip. I can also Option drag into another track if I want to copy a clip or even multiple clips. If I shift click these 3, I can Option drag all of this to create more of this. I can also Command D all of this at the same time. So both of these tools are really flexible. Holding down Option to move a specific part of an audio file or duplicate it to a specific place, or I can, if I hold down Command or hit Command D, it's going to duplicate that basically at the end of whatever I have. So if I wanted, for instance, to copy just this little portion of this audio file here, Command D is going to duplicate it in row, but I may not want that. Maybe I want to actually move this up here. So in that case, I'm going to Option drag that audio file. One thing that's really important to notice with the clips is that it's very regional based where my mouse is. You can see if I pass my mouse up to above this area down at the bottom, up into the header where the title is, you can see that it turns into a hand. And that's where I'm able to actually grab and drag this audio file around. So if I select the whole thing, I can click and drag and move it. If I select a little portion of this and I go up into this area, I can move just that portion or duplicate it or whatever I want with it. The region down here at the bottom is for selecting parts of the area. And when we get into automation where we're adding lines and stuff, vector lines, that's where the automation goes. So it's really important to notice the difference here in where I'm selecting an audio file, where I'm mousing over it. If I go to the end of an audio file or the beginning, you can see that my cursor turns into a bracket. And here I'm able to resize this clip if I want. Maybe I only want this portion of the audio file. I can do that. Another thing that I can do is crop this. So if I select this area and I right click, I can go down to split. Actually, that will split out this portion, which is Command E, into a separate audio file as well. Now, I kind of just misspoke there for a second. One thing really important to remember about Ableton is that everything we're doing right now is generated from a single audio file. It's not making new audio files when I change this around or copy this or move it around or move it down. All it's doing is generating new clips from this single instance of this audio file called Kalimba feed. So, in addition, I'm able to resize this again. This audio file is still part of this small clip. It's just basically hidden, and I'm only isolating a little portion of this. So it's important to remember that all of these instances of Kalimba Feed 1 are from a single audio file. No matter what I do to them, they are still instances of that single audio file. So if we talk about moving things around the grid too, let's talk about this grid a little bit. If I'm trying to write music that's rhythmic, I want to use the grid as a guidepost for where notes are going to go in the beats, in the measure. As we talked about before, the measure numbers are at the top. This is the ruler that's showing me the measure numbers. And if I zoom in, for instance, you can see measure 1 starts at the beginning here, measure 2 begins right there, and we have measure 1 beat 2, measure 1 beat 3, measure 1 beat 4, because I'm in 4/4 time. And then it goes to measure 2 beat 2, measure 3 beat 3, 2 beat 3, and measure 2 beat 4. So that is different than time as well, right? Measures are not time. They are beats in the measure. At the bottom is the time. So you can see the timeline down here at the bottom is showing me exactly where I am in the music. In this case, 3.5 seconds. And it's just going to basically tell me how long my track is as the play header is playing. You can see at this moment, we're at almost the 25-second mark of whatever this is. So if I want to use what's called quantization or snapping to the grid, right? Snap to grid means that these audio files are only going to be movable onto this grid that you can see. So you can see I'm not able to put this audio file between these two places. Now I can change this if I want. So if I mouse out here, I can go down here and actually select whatever I want. Actually, I think what the grid is set to, it's based on how far zoomed in I am or not. So the grid here will decide what the resolution of how far you can zoom in and move beats around. Now, if you're writing something rhythmic, I very strongly suggest you use the grid, right? It's way easier to snap things to beats than to try and just guess of where they should be to make something rhythmic. If I do, though, want to turn off the grid, I can just right-click in here in this empty space. Now, it's important to realize if I mouse over this audio file and right-click, it gives me a different set of options because I'm over top of this clip. So I need to be in empty space here, right-click, I can turn off Snap to Grid, which is also Command 4. And that will turn off the gridding, and I can literally move this audio file to anywhere I want within, basically within the resolution of the monitor. So this can be really useful. Obviously, sometimes things you need to fine tune where something goes. Now, another thing you can do is if these audio files are snapping like they are here, if I hold down Command, you can see that I now have an option to click and drag this like it has no resolution, right? Like the grid is turned off. So holding down Command and dragging an audio file will allow you to also put it anywhere you want. So audio files also have fade tools on them. So you can see if I mouse over this, if I click on this audio file, I can drag this node here at the top of the audio file over, and you can actually see it physically, like visually, actually fading in this audio file. I can also change the slope and shape of the way it fades. And I can also add a fade out if I need to. Now, if I have two audio files right next to each other, when I go to use the fade tool, you can also create a crossfade. So if I grab this audio file and I click on it and I go down to create crossfade on the clip edge, now there is a crossfade. So the two audio files are going to cross into each other to smooth out the transition between the two files. Obviously, this looks a little bit different than the fade in and fade out. But again, the crossfade is used specifically to move from one audio file to another smoothly if you're getting some sort of clicking or you're getting it sounds like a rough connection between two audio files. Or two clips, I should say. Because again, this is all generated from one audio file. So, and so that's the basics of adding an audio file. Now, it's really important to remember that any effects that I add to this first track called Kalimba Feed number 1, right, or track 1, are going to affect every single audio file in this channel, right, in this track. So if I were to add, for instance, a delay, let's just add your generic delay. I just do that by double clicking. I can also click and drag it in here. I can also click and drag it up here onto the window at the top, and it will add it to that track. Every single audio file now in this first track is going to have delay on it. And it's important to remember that you can't isolate them out, right? This is also why it's a really good practice to have sounds that are fairly contrasting to be on separate tracks, right? If I have a really low sound that's kind of bassy or atmospheric, I don't want to put that on the same track as something that's high and metallic or that sounds completely different. Because most likely I'm going to want to give those tracks or those sounds different effects or different treatment. And if they're on the same track, they cannot get separate and distinctive treatment. So if I add the delay on there, you can now hear that this track is going to delay. We're going to hear it repeating over and over. And every instance of this is going to have a delay on it. That's the basics. And again, I can add as many, clips. I don't know if as many is the correct term. I've never added maybe more than 5 or 6, 7, 10. Sometimes you have effects down here. But you can develop pretty long effects chains for individual tracks. Let's talk now about editing the audio on a kind of deeper level. If I double click on an actual clip, you can see that the audio track pops up down here at the bottom. Now this gives me way more control over that individual clip, and I can do all kinds of stuff with it. So first of all, if I want to see this better, I can also resize it. If you can see, if I pass the cursor down here at the bottom, it turns into this little arrowy thing, and I can move this up and expand the visualization of this down at the bottom. First of all, let's talk about the individual audio files and how they work. So a really important thing to remember is, or to know, is how audio files are treated. For many years, of course, before computers, the only way to change the pitch or speed of an audio file was to slow it down. And pitch and speed were connected, right? There was no way to separate pitch from speed. So if I wanted to play a song lower in pitch, I had to play it slower. Just like an old record player, you turn it, you slow it down, it's going to lower in pitch. But with the advent of computers, of course, and a lot of advanced technology now, we can easily separate pitch and speed from each other. So I can, for instance, lower the sound of an audio file by by a lot and maintain the speed of it to some success. The further I bend an audio file from its original form, the weirder it'll get, the less it'll kind of hold on to its original sound. And obviously that's related to pitch, but it's also just, it's going to get weird the higher or lower you move it from the original. So in Ableton, if I have a clip selected like this one, you can see that down here, the warp button is going to separate time from pitch. So if I now change the pitch down here, it's going to change the length of the audio file. So you can actually see as I stretch this out, or if I change the pitch up and down plus 13, you can see the timeline down here at the bottom is stretching out or going in based on whether or not I'm lowering or raising this. So it's essentially making this audio file longer. In addition, you'll see it up here in the arrange window. We'll see that audio file kind of get longer or shorter based on this basic. So if I drag this out, you can see the audio file up here actually adjusting to being longer and shorter. And that's because warp is turned off. So in this case, I'm using this in a very traditional sense. If I want to lower the pitch, it's going to make it longer. If I want to raise the pitch, it's going to make it shorter and play it faster or slower. If I turn warp on though, it's now going to lock it into the length that it is, and I can now change the pitch and it's not going to change its length. So either can be really effective and interesting. Just so you know some basic principles, if I lower a track or recording an octave, it will make it, if I have warp turned off, let's say this, if warp is turned off and I lower this -12, which is 12 half steps, the audio file is going to be twice as long, and twice as, like, basically twice as long, meaning the tempo will be half the length that it was. If I raise this 12 half steps, it's going to be half as long, meaning twice as fast and 1 octave higher. And that's the basic concept of using the warp, right, along with pitching things up. Now, you can get really cool results from making this very high and doing some weird, funky things with your sounds. Experiment with it. There's no wrong answer. It partly just depends on what you're trying to do. So, for instance, if I solo this single kalimba sound, let me turn that delay off too. So I'm going to go over to kalimba track, turn off the delay, turn off this amp. If we hear that again, so these are some audio files that I've made in the past. So if I turn off warp and I lower this by 12, right, we're going to hear it an octave lower, which can be really cool. But if I lower it, for instance, make it up 32, it's going to lose its quality, right? It doesn't sound anymore like the kalimba sound at all. It now sounds like a glitchy audio effect, which could be really cool. So you just should experiment, right? If I turn warp on and crank this up to 44, or for instance, I'm going to get some really cool, funky digital audio kind of effects, which can be really neat to play around with. This is also the result of the type of warping that's happening. So right now you can see beats is selected, and I could go down here to complex, and this will do a better job of trying to maintain the original sound with less digital kind of artifacty stuff going on. So I mean, obviously this doesn't sound anything like the original, but at least it's sustaining notes now. So the way you use warp really depends on how you want, what you're looking for. If you're warping a drum beat, then you probably want it to be on beats. But experiment with these, because using a different one will give you different results. And it's just kind of neat ways of playing around with this to find out, like, get some interesting sounds. There's also a reverse key here, which you can use that will literally just reverse the audio file. So if I hit reverse, it's going to reverse the audio file. In addition to that, I can also click on the region or the clip and hit R, and it will reverse the audio file as well. So the R key will reverse any clip. So let's talk now about how to take an instrument and add audio files to it. So you could imagine I can take the kalimba sound and turn it into a synthesizer that I can play with the MIDI keyboard. Now this is called sampling. So it does require a MIDI track. So if we go up here to create again, we would insert a MIDI track. And you can see it made a track called MIDI 7 over here. Or yeah, it's a seventh track, and it's a MIDI track. And what I'm going to do now is just, all I need to do is drag and drop an audio file down here in this area at the bottom where we would add audio files, or where we would add mostly effects, right? So I'll use this first kalimba sample because it's kind of the driest and cleanest, and just drag and drop it right down here into this MIDI track. So what this does is it actually adds something called the sampler. Actually, this might be the simpler. I can't remember which. There's the sampler and the simpler, which are similar synthesizer sound things that basically turn your sound into a MIDI instrument. Now on Kalimba feed 1, this audio file over here, which is, sorry, this MIDI track, it's now going to play this as an instrument. So if I turn the keys on, I don't have a MIDI keyboard connected right now. If I turn that on, I can now play a keyboard, if I had a MIDI keyboard, and play a melody with this audio file. I can also make some changes in here. So imagine I want to actually have this start here. Maybe I want to have it only be this much, and I want to add a little bit of a decay on here, so it doesn't come in right away. Or add a fade, that'll help too. So you can see now it's turned my audio file into an instrument that I could actually play a melody with, which is a very powerful way of using audio files. It's called sampling. The way I would record, of course, with the Kalimba feed is arm the track. So you can see I've clicked the arm track button, which is the one on the far left here, or far right. And then I need to actually hit the record key, which is this button here. And that will start recording in this track. So let's go to the beginning. I can hit the stop key will take the cursor to the beginning. Then I hit record. It's going to count off 1 bar. And you can see it's now added these MIDI notes that are going to be playing my kalimba sound. The last thing that I want to talk about here is how to save a project like this correctly, so that everything stays together and you have all the components of this project the next time you open it. So one of the issues here is that, well, let's just start with me saving this. I'm going to hit Shift Command S or go over here to save as, right? Save live set as. So say I want to save this project. I name this, I'll just call it test project and put it on the desktop. So if I navigate now to the Finder, I go to desktop, you can see I have a file now on the desktop called test project, and it's called project because Ableton always adds the word project afterwards. If I open this, you can see that it's literally only, if I click on here, there's nothing in this. It is just the Ableton file, the ALS file. And all that is data about what audio files are being used, what MIDI notes there are, what plugins are being used, where they live. But you'll notice in this folder, there are no audio files. And the problem is, if you wanted to share this with someone else, for example, these audio files live on my hard drive in a folder called samples, right? Which is actually, I think, in my documents folder. Okay. So we need to find a way of getting these audio files copied into the project folder as well, right? We don't want them just sitting in that other folder. So for example, a really good example of this is, say you download a bunch of cool files that you're using in your track. I don't know, you get a recording of whale sounds and you want to use it in music. You can drag and drop that audio file from the downloads folder into your project, and it will work. It will work up until the moment where you empty the downloads folder. And then that audio file gets put in the trash, and then Ableton says, I can't find this audio file, and it's a blank clip in the project. So you want to make sure all of the audio files get saved into this new project folder. And basically what happens is, this audio file Kalimba feed will get copied. It will get copied, a new copy will be made, and it will be added to your project. So what I'm going to do now then, it's a very simple thing to do. Once I'm done with this and I'm ready, I've saved the project, I'm going to go up here to File and then go down to here to Collect All and Save. And I click on this button, and then this little window pops up saying, what do you want to save? Just leave the first three, leave it as default. You don't need the files from the factory packs. You only need the first three. You say OK, and it's done. So what has happened now, if we go back to the Finder, I go to the desktop, I open my file again, you can see now that the project folder has changed. There's now a new folder called Samples, and a folder called Imported is in there, and all the audio files that are required to make this work are listed in this folder. And that's how you basically make sure your project has all its components, right? Otherwise it will not. Or, again, it will work up until the moment that any audio file in that project gets moved, right? So like I said, you empty your downloads folder, and now suddenly your audio project is missing audio files because Ableton doesn't know where they went. Now there are ways of relinking to audio files if they've been moved, but the best solution here is just to make sure you always save and then collect all and save. So again, we go to Ableton, collect all and save, and then we add any new audio files too. So as I keep working on this again, I might add more audio files in here. Those don't get added to that folder until I do another collect all and save. So I have to collect all and save each time that audio files are added to the project. Now there might be a settings option to automatically add audio files. I'll look into it. I'm not sure if there is something like that. But that would be a good feature, right? That any audio file added to a project is instantly put in the project folder, no matter what. The nice thing about this, though, is that oftentimes you experiment. So I may drag in 20 audio files and play around with them, but maybe I'll end up using 5. I don't want that project folder cluttered up with a bunch of audio files that are not being used. So it would make sense that it wouldn't just add them automatically. So anyways, this ends this tutorial about using audio and basically saving your project.